there was this piece in Quillette, which I'll do my best. I mean, I've read it. I'm going to try to summarize it I'm not good at summarizing things non-polemically, to be honest with you. It's called Black American Culture and the Racial Wealth Gap, and it's by a guy named Coleman Hughes, who, it should be noted for purposes of this, like, he is an undergraduate, and, I mean, well, I'm not going to elaborate what I was up to in college, but I wasn't writing anything like this, so let me just give credit where credit is due. I was focused on, well, maybe less harmful activities because I wasn't writing trash like this. But see, I can't help myself. But I wasn't doing something so ambitious. But he's
also African American, to note.
Yes, which is relevant, I think, when we get to the stuff that I can speak more clearly on, which is really the obvious market opportunity that's open in this sort of intellectual dark web scene. But he's basically going to say he goes after your work and Ta-Nehisi Coates' work. And, I want, maybe you can elaborate on this. And I know that people will accuse me, particularly those kind of, people who float around those circles of, being uncharitable and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, I mean, this piece, first of all, this is a restating of a very old argument, and it's the culture version instead of the genetics version, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of examples about immigration which don't make sense, because he's going to say that there's immigrant communities who come to the United States who face discrimination and whose wealth has grown significantly, so that sort of disproves this racism focus. Now, obviously, like the first response is that still, even though people have these very racialized images of immigrants, most people that immigrate to this country are definitely, relatively speaking, certainly have some financial and educational attainment levels. So that already really complicates that claim. And then there's just these other kind of things that to me, just aren't coherent. Like, yes, Singapore was, colonized, and then it wasn't. But that meant that, like, right, they were decolonized. Nobody stayed and sort of forced them to grow cotton. And then there's just these sort of broader, like, then the really kind of, frankly, Bill Cosby stuff about, Black culture. Yeah. So, that's what I got from it. And I don't know, basically, like, what's your take? What's your response to it? And what kind of ecosystem do you see it fitting in?
Yeah. So I have a couple of things. I mean, one is, look, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So he's sort of manipulating a whole bunch of statistics here, which is fine. And he's undergraduate. Maybe he hasn't even taken statistics. And I got a lot of crap on Twitter for calling him an undergrad. And I, was responding to Sam Harris, who was fawning over this guy, saying that can you believe this guy is an undergraduate and he's, taking on these,
he should have added and Black.
Right.
As if Sam Harris was being more
so articulate.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, look, the statistics that he proves are wrong. I mean, he's just saying, look, slavery, and again, one of the points was slavery was not profitable because the South was poor, one. Two, the New Deal did not have these effects because Blacks, gained money after the New Deal. Well, sure. I mean, you could say, some of the stats for Black communities went up after the New Deal, but yes, the New Deal has these deleterious effects. So a lot of this stuff is really slippery.
Well, can I ask you a really quick question about that? Not to interrupt. Yeah. Could it even be fair to say, because I'm actually kind of on a sort of, we need to not throw the baby out of the bathwater with FDR and the New Deal kick. Is it even fair to say that, even if we said, okay, America's going through a mass economic meltdown and a Gilded Age, and there's Jim Crow, and in the context of there was, through broad-based delivery, some improvement for African Americans, which was real, and then of course because of things like the Dixiecrats and because of things like it was implemented, it was massively disproportionately beneficial for white people. So then you could even say, well, sure, the New Deal benefited everybody, but it's the difference between getting on a 2-speed bicycle versus getting into a BMW. And that still wouldn't contradict what you've demonstrated in your research.
Right, exactly. And again, sure, there were some Black families that got out of those racialized ghettos, but a lot that couldn't, So I just think those statistics don't say nearly as much as he thinks they say. But like that apart, I mean, here's the nub of the argument, right? At the end, he's like, okay, well, fine, but really this is about Blacks making bad decisions and, single parent homes. And like you said, Bill Cosby stuff. I mean, I'll note that like all of his citations and statistics come from Thomas Sowell, who is another one of these people. But, at the end, he makes these claims that like, why is nobody talking about self-help and culture? Why is nobody talking about this? All of the people are talking about policies and prescriptions. And that's where I just like laugh out loud, right? Like that is all anyone has ever talked about is self-help and Black culture. I mean, that idea to me, like he is this undergraduate, right? And this is why this is relevant. Like in his studies, he thinks that this idea is this like brand new thing, like, hey guys, why don't you think about this, right? Like when I thought I discovered like feminism in college, right? Like, hey, you guys, guess what? And like, meanwhile, there's been like 3 waves that I have to get caught up on before I can say anything intelligibly. And thank God there wasn't like, internet back then for me to post my thoughts on why I think, feminism is the right way to blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. So, where he's coming from a very long and loud, vocal, history of Black and white focused on Black self-help, right? You go back to Booker T. Washington. You can, talk about, like every sort of, I want to say like who isn't in this, right? Daniel Patrick Moynihan, right? In the administration, in the Johnson administration. And these were good liberals and good Black leaders. And so that's
Will you tell the Moynihan report really quickly? Because I think I thought of that too when I read this piece. And I was like, and I really honestly, and again, this sounds condescending, but I don't care. You know what?
Yeah.
Don't be a snowflake.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, has this kid ever even heard of the Moynihan report?
I know.
So maybe explain the Moynihan
exactly.
report.
I mean, right. I mean, this is like the Moynihan report, book report, right? I mean, this is exactly, the Moynihan report is like, yes, we like screwed some stuff up as the government, but really there's this, he calls it a tangle of pathology in Black culture. And of course, he was citing E. Franklin Frazier, a Black scholar, who had also made this claim. So this is just the oldest story in the book. Booker T. Washington says this, right? We have to work on ourselves and self-help, and then whites will respect us if we do this sort of thing. And the whole central premise of my book is why this doesn't work, which makes me think that he actually didn't read my book.
Right.
Because his whole argument is the argument on which my book is sort of the argument that my book is arguing with, because this is what I'm saying. Look at these Black banks, right? This is Black self-help and Black entrepreneurialism and all the cultural ways that were, pushed on Blacks and look at how they tried so hard to build wealth given these external circumstances, right? And why it didn't work. And it wasn't for lack of trying, and it wasn't single parent homes and all of this stuff. It was the way that capitalism works. And so, I don't even know, like people are like, well, why don't you respond to this article? I've had a bunch of people write me and I'm like, but I did. I mean, I wrote a whole book responding to this because this argument is not new, is not interesting. And it gets back to that whole intellectual dark web. I mean, these guys who think the thing that they're saying, maybe women are irrational, is like the newest freaking idea ever. And
I hadn't heard that before,
really?
Actually. I'm going to need to look into that.
Right. Like this idea that like, oh, well, maybe we should study, whether there's genetic racial differences. Well, you know what? Like that has been the history of science, and maybe women just don't like to be out working, but we've heard this one before, So these ideas that are, supposedly like so, dangerous and breathtaking, like they're so boring. They're so boring. And this was this Quillette article. Like this is so boring.
Yes, it's incredible. I mean, look, and you're telling me because I'm actually having to write a book about all of this. And yes, I could tell you it's really boring, dreary stuff. But what's interesting,
Yeah.
I guess what's interesting to me, and I feel like your work is so illustrative of this, because I think that there's kind of three dynamics, like one dynamic, and where I don't sympathize with the dark web characters, but I might sympathize with somebody who's an undergraduate, is I totally get and spend time critiquing. I think that there is a certain type of very dumbed down, as frankly there is in every iteration of politics, but like a certain type of, I don't really even know the right phrase for it, but it's like a kind of politics that doesn't deal with, as an example, economics or history or context, and it is kind of a lot of sort of generic cultural signifiers. And I could see that people, they sort of perceive as like, okay, well, all politics is just sort of like, you know, what websites you read, what kind of culture you identify with or don't. And I wouldn't draw a false equivalency there either, because it's still better to be on the like, I oppose sexism side of that. But it's a very shallow politics with a lot of problematic assumptions across the board, in my view. So what these guys do is they take, I think, first there's always a market, an inbuilt prejudice that pre-exists. And then they take it and they say, see, like, you know, what you perceive of as quote unquote left is just sort of like, I don't know, it's like a, you know, it's a listicle from BuzzFeed about why, oh, Friends is actually problematic or something. And that's the be all and end all of their politics, and they're annoying and they're unfun and all this. And sometimes, frankly, those people are annoying and unfun, if we're being real. And we have this big, seductive, serious project for you. And then what they do is they do two things. One, as you said, they substitute old zombie ideas, which just are either anywhere from kind of generic and actually non-controversial to like I remember, like that was Sam Harris's game years ago with Islam. It was like either you know, I'm going to do a thought experiment about nuking the Middle East, which is obscene. And then when you call me on it, I'm going to just back up basically to my position is essentially going to be like, well, you know, Islamic terrorism is an issue. I was like, there is literally nobody in the earth that disagrees with that. Right. And, but the other third step that they do, and I'm putting a lot in here because I think it's really important, I would like you to elaborate on it, is it goes back to the thing with Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan in the 1960s, which is it's not only ahistorical, it is the enemy of history, because it is suggesting that decontextualized stats, and then in fact all of these people's thought experiments and intuitions and prejudices trump the actual research and the actual things that have been demonstrated in any number of these areas. And that's why this Quillette piece was just like right to the center of it, because he took you on. And as you said, it was like, you did this work. Like this wasn't like I'm, you know, like, okay, like Mehrsa, I agree with you, but you wrote a book where you said, you know, I kind of feel like racism is a bad thing. And this kid responded to that. You answered this claim and it's all just skipped. And that's their move with anybody who has a substantive move against them across the board. So they're literally selling not only these reactionary ideas, but almost like the destruction of history as a discipline.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is exactly right. I mean, it is the idea that I am going to look at the world today as it is. So the black racial wealth gap, women, you know, the earning wage gap, Middle Eastern terrorism, and explain it, not reading any history, right? Not tracking any of it, and just explain it as is. And so the explanation must be that blacks are lazy, that women are not good at working and should be home, and that Islam is just violent, right? And so you do a little bit of thought, like you peel one layer of an onion, and you're like, I know how things work. And the thing about history is, like, the more you dig in, the more humble you become about the ability to know anything, right? I mean, you truly, like, you're just, gosh, like, these people were so wrong historically that, you know, I mean, reading President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, on the cusp of the Civil War, saying, why should we treat blacks like special? Because capitalism will take care of it. And you're reading this like, how could you possibly think that? How could you possibly think that their former masters are just going to pay them what they're worth, and yet this was a thought. And I see these arguments now, and it's like you want to explain the world today without any context, right? And any real digging or knowledge. And so to hear Sam Harris talk about Islam, he's like, well, and one of his claims is like the only time Islam is reformed is when the West, influences it. So it's like America. And it's like first of all, I doubt he could name 3 Islamic reformists. And I am not an Islam scholar, but I'm from Iran, and I could name 10 Islamic reformists within Islam who have been reforming Islam for generations.
And didn't do podcasts with Sam Harris. Like, we would have to stipulate he doesn't personally do, like, silly book tours with them, but like actual people working in context. I think, though, that is that's what starts to catch me. Like, I have my particular, like, it annoys me, and this scene is totally overrepresented in the media spaces I'm in. But I think the long tail real threat is we already have such a kind of policy illiteracy and ahistorical, just total lack of awareness. And by the way, even, I know people who come to, radically different political conclusions that I come to, and but they still have a sense. It's not, I guess my point being is you could even expand it beyond a particular political analysis. I'm talking just a general situational awareness. And these guys are actually saying that, no, the history, the context, it really doesn't matter. And what matters is just some sort of bridge between your kind of like innate prejudices and then like quote unquote science. And then all of a sudden it's like, why should I work with women? Why should I do that? Because it's like, of course, it's just a self-reinforcing prejudice loop.
Right. And back to the Iran, like the Muslim point. I mean, if you understand that history, like the Iranian Revolution, that was horrible. That was the first Muslim takeover of a country, and ended very poorly. And then we're still facing the repercussions. But like anyone who knows Iran understands that the seeds for that revolution were planted in 1953 when the American CIA ousts Mossadegh, our democratically elected leader, from the American embassy. So when the Islamic, crazy people take over that embassy and take those Americans hostage, I'm not justifying it, but like everyone in Iran, as appalled as we were, understood, they're worried about the Americans because that's where the last coup came from, the fake coup. So we're going to go there. And so ISIS, look at every history of ISIS. How did ISIS form? Well, turns out in Iraqi prisons that we set up and mistreated people. So you look at radical Islam, and so when Sam Harris says, well, the West has been the only good influence on Islam in New York, are you kidding me? Like every bad turn, you can explain by some sort of Western influence. Not every. Obviously there is plenty of corruption and plenty of deceit to go around all through the Middle East, and awful fundamentalism, as there is everywhere, right? However, I think to just say, and like you said, these people have some understanding of knowledge. So I keep hearing, well, Sam Harris is a PhD in neuroscience. Well, fine, then let him stick to that.
Question that one.
Right.
I would question that.
Right, let him stick to that. Right, sure. But even Steven Pinker, right? Steven Pinker maybe understands a bit about language, but then he goes off and talks about a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's like, well, maybe this is not your expertise, And so to have a little bit of intellectual humility, especially when saying things that, again, like are so boring and so old and have destroyed so many lives,
Right. How boring they are is only matched by how harmful they are.
Right. Yeah, right. Like the Charles Murray, research, quote unquote research. So harmful.
Well, Charles Murray's another person that you could put in the context of your quotes earlier about Greenspan and Friedman. Charles Murray has literally said, in the context of defending his just despicable work on IQ, which actually is really a fundamental. I mean, it's really a fundamental justification. It's not only racist; it's really fundamentally a class hierarchy argument. But he said, specifically with regards to civil rights, he said, well, by the early '70s, you took most of the juice out of the environment. By which he meant that literally discrimination wasn't legally codified for the first time in America since Reconstruction, and that there's I mean, so it's just so ludicrous, and any kind of
and to hear Sam Harris talk about it, it's like, well, we just want to hear these ideas. Well, you know who heard Charles Murray's idea is every policymaker that he talked to. Like, his ideas have had plenty of podium, right? No one is silencing Charles Murray, and this was a funny thing. Like, I don't do Twitter all that well, but I was on Twitter and having these exchanges with, I should not have poked this bear, but the Sam Harris people, and they were like, why are you trying to silence Coleman Hughes? I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I have maybe I don't know, 500 followers or something. This kid has 30,000. Like, no one is silencing him. He got retweeted by Sam Harris and Charles Murray and Christine Somers, and I am retweeted by, a bunch of socialists, right? So, look at our
Some of us are pretty
right?
influential, Mehrsa.
Well, thank you. Yes. But I feel like, the people who complain most about silencing end up having the biggest microphones,
Oh, it's just jujitsu whining. But I do just want to make clear on my end that and unlike Mehrsa, I do want to silence Coleman Hughes among any number of people. I'm a silencer. Mehrsa Baradaran, the book is The Color of Money. Really, honestly, please, people, I know many of you who watch the show have actually told me that they ordered your book and have been engaging in your work. This is the type of work that actually explains the world we're in and how to get out of our predicament. And it is actually interesting. So I really appreciate your time, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course.